Picture this. You wake up tomorrow morning, and instead of immediately reaching for your phone to check social media, instead of that familiar knot of anxiety forming in your stomach about your endless to-do list, instead of worrying about what people think of your latest Instagram post, you feel nothing. Not emptiness, but a profound sense of clarity. You realize that most of the things that kept you awake last night, most of the drama that consumed your thoughts yesterday, most of the validation you desperately sought from others, none of it actually matters. Not in the way you thought it did. What if I told you that this isn't about becoming emotionally numb or checking out of life entirely? What if the secret to a meaningful existence isn't about caring more, but about caring less and caring better? Welcome to The Subtle Art of Not Giving a Fuck by Mark Manson, a counterintuitive approach to living a good life that has challenged millions of readers to reconsider everything they thought they knew about happiness, success, and what it means to live well. This isn't your typical self-help book filled with empty platitudes and feel-good mantras. Instead, Manson delivers a raw, honest examination of human nature and offers a radically different path to contentment. The journey begins with a simple but profound realization. We are all going to die. Not eventually, not someday in the distant future, but relatively soon in the grand scheme of things. And yet, we spend our precious, finite time and energy worrying about things that, in the end, don't matter at all. We give our attention to social media drama, to what strangers think of us, to maintaining an image that exhausts us to uphold. Manson introduces us to a concept that seems almost blasphemous in our culture of relentless positivity. The idea that not giving a fuck about most things is actually the key to a better life. But here's where it gets interesting. This isn't about apathy or nihilism. It's about being more selective, more intentional about where we direct our limited emotional resources. Think of your capacity to care as a finite resource, like money in a bank account. Every day, you make countless withdrawals, getting upset about traffic, worrying about a coworker's opinion, stressing about your social media engagement, feeling anxious about things completely outside your control. By the end of the day, you're emotionally bankrupt, depleted, with nothing left for the things that actually deserve your attention. The subtle art that Manson describes isn't about not caring at all. It's about developing the wisdom to distinguish between what deserves your precious fucks and what doesn't. It's about reserving your emotional energy for the people, problems, and pursuits that align with your deepest values. But before we can master this art, we need to confront some uncomfortable truths about the way we've been conditioned to think about happiness and success. Our culture has sold us the lie that we should always feel good, that negative emotions are problems to be solved rather than natural parts of the human experience, and that if we're not constantly happy and fulfilled, something is wrong with us. Manson challenges this with what he calls the backwards law, the idea that the more desperately we pursue something, the more elusive it becomes. The more we chase happiness, the more miserable we often feel. The more we try to appear confident, the more insecure we become. The more we seek to be loved by everyone, the more we lose ourselves in the process. This backwards law reveals itself everywhere once you start looking for it. Consider the person who desperately wants to be seen as funny. They often come across as trying too hard, making others uncomfortable rather than laugh. Or think about someone who constantly posts about how happy they are on social media. There's often an underlying desperation in that performance that suggests the opposite of what they're trying to project. The root of this problem lies in our relationship with suffering. We've been taught to view pain, discomfort, and negative emotions as enemies to be defeated. But what if suffering isn't a bug in the human experience? What if it's a feature? What if the attempt to eliminate all discomfort from our lives is actually what's making us more miserable? Manson argues that suffering is inevitable, but we get to choose what we suffer for. The question isn't how to avoid problems, it's how to find problems worth having. Everyone struggles, everyone faces pain, everyone encounters setbacks. The difference between a fulfilling life and a miserable one isn't the absence of problems, but the quality of problems we choose to engage with. This reframe is revolutionary. Instead of asking, how can I be happy? We should ask, what am I willing to struggle for? Instead of seeking to eliminate discomfort, we should ask, what discomfort am I willing to sustain? The entrepreneur building a business knows they'll face sleepless nights, financial stress, and constant uncertainty, but they've chosen problems they find meaningful. The parent raising children accepts that they'll be tired, worried, and challenged daily, but they've chosen problems rooted in love. But here's where things get even more interesting. Manson introduces us to the concept of values, not the kind we post on our LinkedIn profiles or recite in job interviews, but our actual, lived values as revealed by our actions and choices. He distinguishes between what he calls good values and bad values. Bad values are those outside our control, what others think of us, material success, being right all the time, staying positive. These values are problematic because they place our well-being in the hands of external forces. When we tie our self-worth to our bank account, our social media likes, or other people's approval, we become victims of circumstances beyond our control. Good values, on the other hand, are internal and actionable honesty, vulnerability, standing up for others, creativity, humility. These values can be practiced regardless of external circumstances. They give us agency and create a foundation for genuine self-respect. The shift from bad values to good values requires something our culture actively discourages: taking responsibility. Not blame, but responsibility. There's a crucial difference. Taking responsibility means acknowledging that while we may not be at fault for everything that happens to us, we are always responsible for how we respond. This responsibility extends to our emotions themselves. We often talk about emotions as if they happen to us. I felt angry, anxiety came over me, I was overwhelmed. But Manson suggests that our emotions are actually feedback systems, providing us with information about our values and priorities. If we're constantly angry, perhaps we need to examine what we're trying to control that's outside our influence. If we're perpetually anxious, maybe we're placing our self-worth in unstable foundations. Taking responsibility for our emotions doesn't mean controlling them or always feeling good. It means recognizing that our emotional reactions often reveal our values and assumptions, and we have the power to examine and potentially change those underlying beliefs. This brings us to one of the most challenging concepts in Manson's philosophy: the idea that we are not special. In a culture that constantly tells us we're unique snowflakes destined for greatness, this message lands like a cold slap. But Manson argues that our belief in our own specialness is actually a source of suffering. When we believe we're special, we expect special treatment, special outcomes, special recognition. When reality fails to meet these expectations, as it inevitably will, we become bitter, entitled, and resentful. The person who believes they deserve success without struggle becomes paralyzed when they encounter their first real challenge. The individual who thinks they're entitled to happiness without pain becomes devastated by life's ordinary difficulties. But here's the paradox: accepting that we're not special is actually liberating. It frees us from the exhausting performance of trying to prove our uniqueness. It allows us to find meaning in ordinary struggles and simple connections. It helps us appreciate the commonality of human experience rather than feeling isolated in our problems. The fear of being ordinary keeps many people trapped in extraordinary misery. They chase dramatic careers, dramatic relationships, dramatic experiences, all in service of feeling special. But Manson suggests that there's profound peace and meaning to be found in embracing our ordinariness, in finding joy in simple pleasures and satisfaction in everyday achievements. As we delve deeper into these concepts, we begin to see how they interconnect. The art of not giving a fuck isn't about caring less, it's about caring more deliberately. It's about choosing our battles, selecting our struggles, and investing our emotional energy in alignment with our deepest values rather than our surface-level anxieties. This philosophy demands that we confront uncomfortable questions about ourselves and our motivations. It asks us to examine why we care so much about certain things and whether that caring serves us or enslaves us. It challenges us to distinguish between the problems worth solving and the drama worth ignoring. The transformation that Manson describes isn't easy or comfortable. It requires us to let go of some cherished beliefs about ourselves and our place in the world. It asks us to accept responsibility for our choices while releasing control over outcomes. It demands that we find meaning in struggle rather than seeking to eliminate struggle altogether. But as we begin to internalize these ideas, something shifts. The constant background anxiety that characterizes modern life begins to quiet. The desperate need for external validation starts to fade. We become more resilient, not because we're avoiding problems, but because we're engaging with problems that actually matter to us. The first half of this journey through Manson's philosophy reveals the foundation of a different way of living, one that's both more honest about the reality of human existence and more hopeful about our capacity to find meaning within that reality. We're beginning to understand that the subtle art he describes isn't just about not giving a FCK, it's about the profound wisdom required to know which FCKs are worth giving. As we stand at this midpoint in our exploration, we can sense that we're approaching something even more transformative. The groundwork has been laid, the old assumptions have been challenged, And we're ready to discover how these insights can be applied to the most important aspects of our lives, our relationships, our work, our sense of purpose, and ultimately, our mortality itself. The deeper we venture into Manson's philosophy, the more we realize that the art of not giving a fuck extends far beyond individual psychology. It fundamentally transforms how we engage with others, how we approach our choices, and how we face the ultimate reality of our existence. One of the most profound shifts occurs in our relationships. When we stop trying to control how others perceive us, when we stop performing for approval, something beautiful happens. We become capable of genuine intimacy. Manson explores how our desperate need to be liked often prevents us from being truly known. We present sanitized versions of ourselves, carefully curated to avoid rejection. But in doing so, we also avoid real connection. The courage to be disliked, paradoxically, makes us more likable not to everyone, but to the people who matter. When we're willing to share our authentic thoughts, feelings, and flaws, we give others permission to do the same. This creates the foundation for relationships built on truth rather than performance, on acceptance rather than admiration. But this authenticity comes with a cost. It means accepting that some people won't like us, that some relationships won't survive our honesty, that conflict is not only inevitable but necessary for deeper connection. Manson argues that healthy relationships require healthy boundaries, and healthy boundaries require the willingness to say no, to disappoint others, to prioritize our values over their comfort. This principle extends to one of the most challenging aspects of human relationships: forgiveness. Not the superficial kind that sweeps problems under the rug, but the deep forgiveness that acknowledges harm while choosing not to let it define us. Manson suggests that holding on to resentment is like giving someone free rent in our heads. It's allowing their past actions to continue controlling our present emotions. True forgiveness isn't about excusing behavior or reconciling relationships. It's about refusing to let other people's choices determine our emotional state. The practice of selective caring also revolutionizes how we approach failure and success. Our culture teaches us to fear failure, to see it as evidence of our inadequacy. But what if failure is simply information? What if it's feedback about our methods, our assumptions, our direction? When we stop giving a fuck about appearing perfect, we become free to experiment, to take risks, to learn from our mistakes without having our self-worth depend on the outcome. This shift in perspective reveals something surprising about success. The people who achieve meaningful accomplishments are often those who failed more than others, not because they're masochistic, but because they're willing to fail in service of something they care about. They've learned to distinguish between failing at something and being a failure as a person. Manson introduces us to the concept of the do something principle. When we're stuck, paralyzed by indecision or overwhelmed by options, the solution isn't more thinking or more planning, it's action. Any action. The movement itself creates momentum, provides feedback, generates new information. We don't need to feel motivated to act. Often, action creates motivation rather than the other way around. This principle challenges another cultural myth, the idea that we need to feel ready, confident, or inspired before we can make changes in our lives. The truth is messier and more hopeful. We can act our way into new ways of thinking and feeling. We can choose behaviors that align with our values, even when our emotions are pulling us in different directions. As we apply these concepts to the broader canvas of our lives, we encounter questions about meaning and purpose. If we're not special, if happiness isn't the goal, if suffering is inevitable, then what's the point? What makes life worth living? Manson's answer is both simple and profound. We create meaning through our choices, not through grand gestures or world-changing achievements, but through the daily decision to engage with life on our own terms. Meaning isn't something we find, it's something we generate through our commitment to our values, our willingness to take responsibility, our courage to face reality without the comforting illusions that keep us small. This brings us to perhaps the most uncomfortable truth in Manson's philosophy, the reality of death. Not as a morbid fixation, but as the ultimate context that gives weight to our choices. When we truly internalize our mortality, not just intellectually, but emotionally, everything changes. The petty concerns that consume our daily lives lose their grip. The opinions of people we don't respect become irrelevant. The fear of taking risks diminishes when we realize that the biggest risk is wasting our finite time on things that don't matter. Death, in Manson's framework, isn't the enemy of meaning, it's what creates meaning. If we lived forever, nothing would be urgent, nothing would be precious, every choice could be delayed indefinitely. It's precisely because our time is limited that our choices matter. It's because we will die that we must choose carefully how to live. This mortality-informed perspective leads to what might be called practical wisdom. We begin to ask different questions, not what will make me happy, but what am I willing to struggle for? Not how can I avoid pain, but what pain is worth experiencing? Not how can I be successful, but what does success mean to me, stripped of other people's definitions? The transformation that occurs when we genuinely adopt these principles is both subtle and revolutionary. We become less reactive and more responsive. We develop what psychologists call emotional regulation, the ability to experience our feelings without being controlled by them. We gain resilience not through avoiding difficulties, but through choosing difficulties that align with our values. We also develop a different relationship with uncertainty. Instead of needing to know exactly how everything will turn out, we become comfortable with taking action based on our best current understanding, knowing that we can adapt as we learn more. This comfort with uncertainty is perhaps one of the most valuable skills in our rapidly changing world. The person who emerges from this philosophical journey is not emotionally numb or cynically detached. They're actually more engaged with life, but selectively so. They care deeply about the people and causes that matter to them, but they're not devastated by criticism from strangers or setbacks in areas outside their control. They've learned to distinguish between what's urgent and what's important, between what's their responsibility and what's not. Most remarkably, they've discovered that the secret to not giving a FCK about the wrong things is to give an FCK about the right things. It's not about caring less, it's about caring better. It's about developing the wisdom to know where to invest your precious emotional energy and the courage to redirect it when you realize you've been investing it poorly. As our journey through these ideas draws to a close, we find ourselves in a different place than where we started. The anxious, approval-seeking, happiness-chasing person we might have been feels like a character from someone else's story. In their place stands someone more grounded, more authentic, more at peace with the fundamental uncertainty and difficulty of human existence. This isn't because all our problems have been solved, it's because we've developed a better relationship with problems themselves. We've learned that the goal isn't a problem-free life, but a life filled with problems worth having. We've discovered that meaning doesn't come from achieving some perfect state of happiness, but from the process of engaging fully with the challenges we choose to take on. The subtle art that Mark Manson describes is, in the end, the art of living consciously. It's about waking up from the unconscious patterns that keep us trapped in cycles of anxiety, resentment, and seeking external validation. It's about taking full responsibility for our inner lives while releasing our need to control outcomes. It's about finding the courage to be ordinary in a culture that demands we be extraordinary, and discovering that this ordinariness contains its own form of profound meaning. Perhaps most importantly, it's about recognizing that we always have a choice. We can't control what happens to us, but we can always choose how we respond. We can choose our values, our priorities, our struggles. We can choose to give our fucks to things that matter rather than things that merely seem urgent. We can choose to live according to our own definition of success rather than society's. We can choose to find meaning in the present moment rather than postponing it until some imagined future when all our problems are solved. These choices aren't made once and then forgotten. They're made daily, moment by moment, in the small decisions that accumulate into a life. Each time we choose authenticity over approval, responsibility over blame, meaning over comfort, we practice the subtle art that Manson describes. We become more fully ourselves, more deeply human, more genuinely alive. The book ends where all good philosophy begins with you, in your life, facing your choices. The concepts and insights we've explored together are only valuable if they change how you engage with your daily reality. The subtle art of not giving a fuck isn't something you master once and then possess forever. It's a practice, a way of being, a continuous choosing of what deserves your precious attention and what doesn't. And perhaps that's the most beautiful thing about this approach to life. It meets you wherever you are and invites you to begin again, right now, with whatever choices you're facing today. If you found value in this exploration of Mark Manson's unconventional wisdom, I'd love for you to join our community of readers and thinkers. Subscribe to Novobook for more deep dives into the books that challenge how we think and live. I'm curious what insight from this journey resonated most deeply with you. Was it the idea of choosing your struggles, the liberation of accepting your ordinariness, or perhaps the recognition that meaning comes from engagement rather than happiness? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Your reflections often illuminate aspects of these ideas that I might have missed. And if you found this exploration helpful, if it shifted something in how you think about your own life and choices, consider sharing it with someone who might benefit from these perspectives. Sometimes the most generous thing we can do is introduce others to ideas that have the power to change how they see themselves and their possibilities. Until our next literary journey together, remember you have more control over your life than you think, and less control than you wish. The art is in knowing the difference and choosing wisely where to place your care.